So at the time of this taking place, I was living in Clarksville, Tennessee. I was 19, maybe 20 years old, and I was living with my parents at the time. My best friend Sarah lived a mile away from my parents' house. She was 2 years older than me, and she was planning to move out. But she didn't like the idea of living with total strangers, and her budget meant that she would have to share a room in a house share. So we came up with the idea of me, her, and one of her friends, all joining our wages together to get a tiny flat. Heck, we didn't even care if we had to sleep in the same bedroom if it meant Sarah felt comfortable and didn't have to be with strangers. We were willing to help, but also on top of this at the time, I was looking forward to moving out. I love my parents dearly, but I wasn't exactly their favorite. My parents had 8 siblings, so we have a big family. I always felt like I was neglected in a way, or just shunned to the side. I was the seventh youngest, so as you can imagine, there were a lot more that came before me, but most of them had left the family house at this point. Sarah would call me up every weekend asking me about updates. We would check online on different sites, and also we were planning to go to some viewings, but even the cheapest places to rent in Clarksville were too much for what I could handle. At the time, I was working 5 nights a week as a waitress for an Italian restaurant, but even that wasn't enough money as it stretched me pretty thin when it came to buying groceries, paying bills, taxes, and all the other millions of expenses you can imagine. I was quite nervous and extremely conscious of spending money. My dad came through a bit of a patch in his life where he got the family into debt, and for a period of 3 years we had debt collectors and bailers banging at our front doors. To me, that was one of the scariest moments of my life, and it made me super insecure about money, spending it and saving it up. I remember some evenings I would just cry thinking that I couldn't move out with Sarah. I was the one holding her and her friend down, and being a waitress 5 nights a week wasn't enough. I had a word with my manager, but there was no extra nights I could take on because he had other people filling in those nights. So I had to find another job, one that could work around the nights as a waitress. My shifts tend to start at around 4:30 and then end around 10:30, but 11:30 on a Friday night, that's when the restaurant was shut. I would earn extra nothing in tips, I know, quite unbelievable, and against the contrary, but the reality is a lot of people wouldn't tip, although they were kind. I didn't expect tips, so please don't think like that. So you can probably guess where all this is going. I started searching online for some jobs in the local area, all of which on the professional sites required degrees, qualifications, and a bunch of other stuff that I wasn't willing to do. So like always, I checked out the usual job ads on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist. These were the ones that offered good money for strange and simple tasks, like delivering things, taking care of dogs, doing odd jobs, and more. Some people might see these tasks as dirty or grubby, but they were willing to pay well for them. Most of these jobs were temporary and short-term, but that was okay because it meant I could try different things and be my own boss, sort of. Even though these people were offering me work, I had the freedom to choose which job I wanted to do. I liked this idea, so I started looking through the listings. It was evening, and I was in my bedroom with my laptop on my lap with covered my feet and legs with the blankets because it was chilly outside. I think it was around mid-November, but not sure. After searching for a while, I found a couple of delivery job listings. At that time, I already had my driving license, and I used my car to drive to a pizza restaurant 5 nights a week. It was the only reason I used the car. The pizza place was about a 10-minute drive away, which was the longest distance I usually drove. I didn't use the car much, so I didn't spend a lot on gas as I only had to fill up the tank once a month, maybe twice at most. This delivery job was perfect because I could just drive, earn money, and deliver or pick up things. In one of the listings, there was a man named Michael who posted an ad. He needed someone to make 6 deliveries a week from Clarksville to Nashville. The drive would take about an hour, covering around 50 miles, depending on the exact location in Nashville. It sounded like the perfect job for me at that time. Michael was offering more than $300 for each shift, which was just an hour to go there and another hour to come back. All he wanted me to do was drop off a box and in the job description, it mentioned that the boxes would contain different things, like odds and ends. It seemed strange and suspicious, but I decided to call Michael using the number he provided in the ad. Then I reached for my phone on the bedside table and dialed the number. I felt anxious and nervous because of my anxiety, but I couldn't afford to live with Sarah or her friend, so I didn't want to disappoint them. That gave me the push I needed to face uncomfortable situations. After about 20 seconds of ringing, Michael finally answered the phone, but he sounded really tense, like he was in trouble or something was wrong. I said, "Hi, I saw your ad on Craigslist about the delivery job. I'm interested and would like to know more, so can you give me some details?" He explained that he didn't need much from me, as all he wanted was someone who could drive, had a driving license, and could use Google Maps or GPS. He stressed the importance of getting the delivery addresses right, as any mistakes could get him into serious trouble, but he said this in a rather threatening tone. So before starting, I had a couple of questions for him. First, I wanted to know how often the deliveries would be and when I should start. But in other end, he was in a hurry and didn't have much time, so he allowed me to ask only 2 questions, but this was strange, like he was hiding something. He mentioned that we could begin next Wednesday, and this conversation took place on a Monday while I was calling him. After that, he said we'd start with 3 deliveries per week, so to me that sounded perfect. An extra $600 each week would be more than enough to supplement my waitressing job and allow me to live with Sarah and her friend. I felt thrilled and overjoyed, knowing that I could now end the call with Michael and call Sarah immediately to tell her the good news: we could move out. I finished the call with Michael, and then I called Sarah to share what had happened. Towards the end of the call with Michael, he mentioned 2 things. First, he told me the time and location to meet him on Wednesday. He wanted us to meet at an RV park about 10 miles away. He said the packages would be there, and he'd have $200 in cash to pay me right then and there. He also said he'd give me more details once I arrived at the RV park. But he wanted me to be there at 6 in the morning. Now imagine me being naive, a 19-year-old girl. I didn't care. The money meant freedom for me, the freedom to move out and live with my friends. That's all I wanted, and I was desperate for it. I was willing to do whatever it took. So, on Wednesday morning, despite the terrible weather, I made my way there. It was pouring rain, and the cold air made it worse, and also the atmosphere felt damp and gloomy. I arrived at the RV park about 10 minutes late. When I got out of my car, I saw Michael standing under the canopy of one of the RV campers. He looked angry and was in a bad mood the moment I walked up to him. Then he kept questioning me on why I was late, and now I'm gonna mess up the delivery, and the person I'm delivering to might not even be there anymore to take the order. Well, he gave me the address in Nashville, then he told me to hurry up and be on my way. He said nothing more and went back into the RV camper. I'd be lying if I said that I stuck to all the speed limits on the way to the delivery. It was around an hour long, but that's 'cause I hit traffic the closer I got to Nashville. This delivery was to a house in the suburbs of Nashville, just outside the center. I pulled up directly outside the house and parked the car up. Then I got the package out of the boot. It was like any normal package. Package was a box that I'd say weighed around 10 to 15 kilos, so it wasn't light, but I had no way of knowing what was inside it, and it was all just a big guessing game when it came to what was in it. I shut the trunk and locked the car, walking up towards the house, questioning myself whether it was the right one or not. The houses were quite condensed, and the yards were small and narrow, so my GPS wasn't very good at pointing out the right number that I needed to be at. I knocked on the door and then rang the doorbell a second after. The door was answered almost immediately, as if someone had planned a wait for me. The door opened, and standing in the frame was a young tall man and had dreadlocks and a cap on. But he seemed less interested in me and the box and more interested in what was behind me going on in the street. His behavior was erratic, and everything about him just felt off, and even didn't let me come into the house. He just took the box, turned around, said thanks, and then shut the door using his foot to push it shut. I stand there cold like a lemon, thinking to myself, what the hell was that? The guy didn't say anything, but shut the door in my face, and that was that. Oh, well, I had $200 in my pocket and it was an hour's drive or two in total to get back home. It was worth it as I got back and I still had the whole day left because I got there at 6 a.m. to the RV camp. Well, when I got back home, I looked at the $200 and I couldn't get over how easy it was. If I could do this 3, 4, 5 times a week, I'd be more than capable of moving out easily, or even buying a better car, freedom, and the potential to buy things. I was being drowned and blinded by the money that I held in my hand. The next delivery would be on Friday, 2 days later, exactly 48 hours after the first. Michael once again texted me telling me to meet him at the same RV park, and now saying that I had 2 deliveries to make. Once again in Nashville, one to the same person again, but another to a completely new address. The second address wasn't too far from the other one though. It was only a couple of roads down around 2 miles away from the previous delivery. So again, Friday rolls around and the weather's a little better. This time I'm more happy, and I'm prepared to now make my way to him on time, so hopefully he wouldn't be so angry. When I got there, I was early by a few minutes, but still Michael seemed groggy, upset, and annoyed about something. He wasn't respectful at all and literally just threw me my cash. He brought the box out and put it on the floor, not even considering to help me put it in the trunk. Then he went back in and bought the second box out. He told me, while looking me directly in the eyes, that I wasn't to make a single mistake. He said that the second house that I'll be delivering to that day was a house that this joint, it's an attached house. He said, it's the one on the left and do not forget. I said, yes, I promise I will not forget. And with that, he hands me another $200 cash, and I turn around putting both boxes in my trunk and drive away, leaving him in the RV park. This time I didn't need to speed as I was early and on schedule. On top of this, the weather was great and there was barely any traffic. It was a bit unusual and I couldn't figure out why, but I didn't care. I did my first delivery to the same usual guy and once again, the boxes looked the same and felt a similar weight, like the ones on Wednesday. Again, I carried up the drive to the first guy who I'd met before on Wednesday. I knock on his door and again, he opens within a second of me knocking. He glances around, past me down the street, takes the box, says thanks, and then shuts the door with his foot. I chuckled to myself thinking, what the hell? But not once did it occur to me to question what was in that box as I was too blinded by the money. Now, as I made my way back down the drive, I had to punch in the address of the second house as this delivery would be to the attached one. The only notes Michael had given me was that it was the house on the left, the attached one to the left. Now, when I got to the street, I was so confused that I had no idea which one it was. Every house was attached, not just the ones that he had given me, and this is the moment where I got the box out the trunk and stood in the middle of the street wondering what the hell was going on. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to call Michael because I knew he'd be pissed. The last thing I wanted to do was lose this job as it seemed to be regular money, and Michael, even invertedly said that. After being stood, basically looking around the houses for around 5 minutes, an elderly man who looked to be in his mid to late 60s comes stumbling out onto his front yard. He had some landscaping equipment on one of those small push mowers. He also had a bunch of cabling and extension cables for the electrics. He placed it all out into the front yard, and after doing so, stood up and started staring at me. That's when I got really weirded and freaked out. Then he walked over to me saying, "Hello, can I help you?" While considering I was parked almost directly outside his front lawn, I guess that's what came about the interaction. I said I had a delivery to make, and then instantly he cuts me off saying, yes, that will be for my wife. She's always ordering clothes and things online." Before I could say anything else, he grabs the box out of my trunk and begins to lift it. He makes a statement about how heavy it is and then jokes walking it back into his house. The thing is, I immediately got the vibes this was the complete wrong house. The guy, delivered to on Wednesday and just a second ago, seemed nothing like the type of people who would order the same thing from Michael. This elderly guy was gone. He walked up into his front door, and that was it, shut the door behind him. Heck, it was the left-hand side to one of the attached houses, so I bit my tongue and prayed to God it was the right one. I also prepared myself to lose my job that day, thinking that maybe I did deliver it to the wrong one, but no one else was coming out and no one else had come to get it, but the old man, so I figured it was the right person. How could it not be? I get in my car and drive home. The hour drive went quickly as I just had the radio on, banging out some tunes. It was a good drive, quite relaxing. When I got back, once again, I was staring at the cash, just feeling it, taking deep breaths, thinking how easy this all was. My day had just started and had a waitress shift that night, but I was out to see my friends for the rest of that day. So I was out with Sarah for lunch, and when I got a text from Michael, the text was full of cusses and how he was saying that he was coming to get me. I stopped eating my food immediately and looked up at Sarah. She knows I'm worried and she asks what's wrong. Immediately I step out of the restaurant and dial Michael's number. I put my headphones in so I can hear him, but as soon as he picks up, he's swearing and screaming down the line like I've never heard a man do. He tells me that I delivered the package to the wrong address. He said that I was in trouble, big trouble. Then his last words were, "I'm coming for you." I had never genuinely felt so scared for my life, but then Sarah came to me after I explained everything that had just happened to her. The new job, Michael, the deliveries, the boxes, then she told me, "But wait, he doesn't know where you lived, does he?" And then it clicked, so how would he know how to find me? Well, he did, because when I went home, another hour passed and a car pulls up onto my parents' drive. I was sitting in the living room with them watching some TV, and my dad stands up looking all confused, crossing his arms. He looks out the front window wondering what the hell is going on. He starts saying to himself, "Who's that, guys? Do you know who this is? Is this one of your friends?" he says to me. Then I look out the window and it's Michael. He's getting out the car and he's armed with a shotgun. I run to the door and lock the door and tell Dad to get on the ground, then I run to the phone and grab the phone. I dial 911 and he's blowing chunks out the door as I do so. At this point, Mom runs upstairs screaming and Dad immediately crawls to the cabinet to get his rifle out. I'm on the phone to the 911 responder telling them exactly what's happening, but I can barely talk over the gunfire as my dad was now returning fire downstairs to Michael. This guy was a madman and something had gone seriously wrong. My dad returning fire managed to buy us some time, precisely 2 to 3 minutes. You see, Michael had blown huge chunks out the front door, but he wasn't able to get through it. Any attempts he made were met with my dad, basically firing back. Me and Mom were upstairs screaming and crying for our lives, still on the phone to 911. When the police arrived, Michael dropped the shotgun. They ended up macing him and tasering him. They even had the dogs literally mulling at his leg when we went outside to look. My body was shaking so uncontrollably that I felt like I was sat on some type of a vibrating chair, that I couldn't control my thoughts, my breathing, or my heartbeat. Everything felt like a surreal nightmare. After a long investigation, it turns out that Michael had fitted a tracker to my car somehow. I don't know when or how, but he had. That's how he found out where I lived, and if you're wondering what happened with the wrong delivery. The elderly man walked in with the box to give it to his wife. His wife, who was named Sheila, opened the box up, placing it on the kitchen side. They used a pair of scissors to cut open the tape and the bag surrounding the box. Michael did a great job at basically packaging the thing, making it so hard to even get inside it. I remember it being just full of tape the whole way round. Well, once Sheila had opened the box and split every seam of tape, she was met by a sight of human meat. Human body parts and human eyes. This was Michael. He was a supplier of human meats on the dark web, and they were the customers that I was delivering to, but it was Sheila's next door neighbor who had ordered it, not her.
So, this happened when I was a lot younger, nearly 20 years ago, when I was about 7. Over the course of about 3 months, I was visited roughly 4 times, and while I know that it was many, many years ago since it happened, it's been the most vivid memory I have to this very day. On these 4 occasions, I was visited in the middle of the night by a black shadow man. And while there were no distinct features to the shadow, I could tell that it was the outline of a person. Now, as a child, asleep and fully scared, I simply hid under my covers, waited a moment, and peeped out, and the shadow was gone. 2 other times this happened. I woke in the night, and the shadow was standing at the foot of my bed. I distinctly remember calling out for both my sister and my dad, thinking it must have been them in my room. But both times there was no reply. I hid again, and the shadow was gone when I looked. I didn't tell my parents at the time, as I was afraid that I would get into trouble for being awake so late. But I was scared about going to sleep for a long while. The final visit I received from the shadow man came several weeks later. This time it was different though. So far, every time the figure had just stood at the end of my bed. I felt as though I could feel its eyes on me always. I didn't know if it was a friendly shadow or a nefarious one. All I knew was that this thing kept coming back and standing at the end of my bed. So when I opened my eyes in the middle of the night for what would be the final visit, I was terrified when the figure was clearly sitting on my bed. Still at the end, but with its legs out, sat in kind of a right angle, leaning against the wall. Once again I called out for my dad, and then for my sister, and then for some reason I cannot tell you why I asked if it was Michael Jackson. For some reason the song Smooth Criminal came into my mind, and for some reason I thought maybe it was him. I asked for all of them, but I got no reply, and this time I hid. This time the figure remained when I peeped my head above the cover. And it chills me as I tell you this, but when I look back up, despite the fact that it was a shadow, that there was no distinguishable feature, the shadow clearly turned its head toward me. For the first time, I knew for a fact that it was listening to me and knew that I was in the room too. As a child, I had the false sense of security. My cover was my protection, my invisibility cloak, if you will. I felt naked as soon as a shadow turned toward me. It didn't move from the spot. It never did anything. But the fact that it was sitting on my bed, that was the last time that I saw the figure, and I'm very, very happy about that. I don't know if anybody else has had this sort of visit when they were younger. I have so few good memories as a child, but this one I could paint with my eyes closed.